Welcome to The Jewish Lens, a podcast to discuss anything and everything from a Jewish perspective. Now, please help me welcome the man who controls the media, your host, Jonathan Rosen.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of The Jewish Lens. I'm Jonathan Rosen, and today I'm thrilled to welcome the creator of Jewish book review website, Reading Jewish Fiction, as well as the author of the books, The Wayward Moon and Our Little Histories. Please help me welcome Janice Weizman. Janice, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Well, we have a lot to cover, but I want to start with you and your background a little bit. I usually start by going to that. You grew up in Toronto. So what was your family life like, and especially in particular with regard to Judaism? Were you observant at all?
Well, you could say we were part of the conservative community, and our lives were organized pretty much around the synagogue. There was a famous synagogue in Toronto called Beth Tikva. My parents were part of the founders. There was a rabbi there.
They helped create it?
Well, I mean, there was a big group of people,
Okay.
but yeah, they were among the first families who joined. There was a very charismatic rabbi, and he wanted to get a group of young Jewish families sort of around him. And he was very interested in Zionism, and he's very interested in creating community. And they were part of that. And most of my life in Toronto was a lot was related to that place.
So how was Jewish life in general around where you lived? I mean, not just your synagogue or shul. I mean, how was life in the area, like, for Jews around there?
Listen, the years that I was growing up and up until very recently, it was wonderful. There was virtually no anti-Semitism. Canada was very welcoming, very tolerant. Jews were entirely free to obviously practice their religion and whatever they wanted to do with all the rights involved with that.
How about now? I mean, do you know what's going on with where you used to live right now?
Of course. I mean, I keep up to date, and it's crazy. It's like a different country. Just in the last few years, it's become almost a different place for the Jewish community.
Yeah, I mean, I see videos all the time of what's going on. I mean, it's not great in a lot of places in the States either, but I see in Canada, certain places, it's just horrific. A lot of the scenes unfolding.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. It's very unfortunate. It's definitely a new challenge to the community. I think that the community is organizing and starting to think about ways of, okay, the situation has changed. What are we going to do with that now? There's a very big Jewish community in Canada now. Many Russian Jews came and Israelis came, and I think it numbers a few 100,000 actually. And yeah, as I said, it's a challenge, but it's a very strong community, and they're very mutually supportive. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of organizing. There's a full range of Jewish life from less than Reform to Haredi, and there's a place for everybody. And
that's good.
Yeah.
Well, let's go to your writing a little bit. So when did you first start showing an interest? Were you like interested in writing growing up? Were you a big reader? Let's start with reading first. Were you a big reader?
Yes. As soon as I learned to read, I loved books. And
What were some of your favorite books as a kid?
as a child, I don't know. There was a book called B is for Betsy, for example, about a little girl who goes to school, and I was just enthralled with the story of how she learns to read and how she enjoys school. I know it doesn't sound very cool, but this was like one of my favorites as a small child.
I don't know. I don't think I know that one. So
B is for Betsy. Look it up. It's like a classic. It's quite an old book.
I'm gonna have to check. I'm gonna have to check that out. So when did you first start going in, like, I guess, an interest in writing as well as seeing that you had a talent for it as well?
Well, first of all, I was always sort of making up stories in my head from a very young age. And then when there were creative writing assignments in school, it was always the most exciting thing for me. And I realized that not everybody was that excited about it. For some people, it was kind of a punishment, or it was a chance to, do something else. But I was always like really into it, like, oh, what do we need to do here? And then I'd think of something that went along with the assignment. It was great fun. And then I always had this idea that one day I'm gonna write. It's just,
Were your teachers very encouraging with that? That's how I
yeah,
really
in
got
primary
it.
school they were. I got good feedback, and then the creative writing sort of stopped when we got to junior high and high school. It wasn't something that teachers did anymore. And for many years, I didn't do any creative writing at all. I was very far from it. But I knew there would be a day.
That's 'cause that's how I really show. I like creative writing, the same thing. And then there was a teacher in high school that encouraged me, and that you're supposed to hear it from your parents and everything. But once a teacher said it to me, it made a difference. That's something that I could possibly want to do. So, do you remember what the first thing you wrote is?
As an adult,
Just when you first
it
started
kind of
showing it.
it's a little bit crazy, but I literally didn't do any writing till I was in my late 30s. I trained and worked as a social worker. I guess I used to write reports. I used to get complimented on my reports, but actually a little bit of an interesting story because I knew I would write one day. I didn't know how, I didn't know when. And then the story is that around the year 2000, when there was the second Intifada and there was all these suicide bombings and terrorism in Israel,
Mhm.
I live in Israel, I became sort of curious about Islam and how, the Islamic religion works with this whole idea of suicide bombing. It was just very bewildering. And I decided to take a course, History of Islam, to really learn about it because I knew
Mhm.
very little. And as we were in the course and we started to, learn the history, the story sort of formed in my head based on the history that we were learning in the class. And I started to imagine this story of this young woman because I was asking myself, like so many of the texts that we were looking at were written by men for men, and women were almost completely absent from the from history, like really absent. They were barely in the texts, and they certainly weren't the writers. But we knew they're there, obviously. And this is true of like not only Islamic texts, but also Christian and
Mhm.
Jewish. Even though, of course, the Middle East was full of women, you wouldn't know it to read what's left from that time. And so I started to imagine the life of a woman in that time, in that place. And I was thinking, what if she, because of sort of what happens to her, her fate, is all of a sudden alone in the world. So there's nobody who really cares enough to restrain her or tell her what to do. What would happen then? And that was the beginning of the novel. Here it
Oh,
is.
well, there's an audio portion, so say the name as well. So,
Okay, so it's The Wayward Moon.
okay.
And the reason it's called that, I mean, you sort of have to get to the end of the book to figure it out, but it's this idea of something that goes off the course that it's supposed to be on. For a woman at that time, there was only one path in life. Obviously, marriage at a very young age,
Mhm.
usually an arranged marriage, often, without even consulting the bride, and then children and family, and that was it. That was the only option. And in her case, again, because of how things evolve, she is not going to be on that path. And she has to figure out, okay, what am I going to do? How am I going to deal with this
And
in a
when does
time
this
when
book
there
take
are no
place?
answers to that question? Hmm?
When does the book take place?
It takes place, it starts in around 850 AD,
Mhm.
which is the height of the Islamic Empire. It takes place in a village. It starts in a small village in what is today Iraq. At the time, it was Bavel, I suppose. And then she sort of goes on a journey and she moves through countries in the Middle East, like Iraq and Turkey and Syria and Lebanon, and eventually she arrives in the land of Israel. And
I'm
it's
going to come
everything
back.
that happened on that journey.
Well, I'm going to come back to your books in a minute. So I was reading after high school, you made Aliyah. So what prompted you to do that then? And did you go with your family? I mean, were you nervous? What?
Well, as I said, my family was very Zionist and my community was very Zionist.
Mhm.
And I was very interested in Israel. When I was 12, we went on a family trip and we were here for a few months and I sort of fell in love with it. And I always thought I'd go back. And then when I graduated, I found this program, the one-year program. Many people know it, Hebrew University. And even though I hadn't started university, or many people do this as a gap year, I just went directly to first year. And I thought this will be a test. We'll see how I like it and I'll stay and, we'll see how I manage. And I always, I felt I could always just get on a plane and go back, and that made it a little easier to do that. But I didn't go back.
So how'd your parents feel about that? I'm saying My oldest went to Israel for a gap year. My youngest is there now, actually, for a gap year in Israel. And
Mhm.
that's always my fear that they're going to not come back. They're going to stay there and say it so much. My oldest did come back. My youngest is still there. So we'll see what happens. But how did your parents feel about that at the time?
They were great, actually. They really understood why I wanted to be here, and they were very supportive. I guess it's a little unusual, but it made it a lot easier for me because they totally got it. And then there was a period where my mother even moved here for several years, and yeah, it was that wasn't an issue.
Well, okay, so you're there. You go right after high school. You're studying there. So how well did you acclimate at the time? Was your Hebrew good also, or no?
Yeah, because I had been in a day school
Hmm.
my entire life, I kind of spoke Hebrew. Not perfectly, but I could get by. And yeah, I was game for it. So
So you taught and you took creative writing at Bar Ilan. So how was the studying like in another country? I mean, was English isn't your first language really?
well, as I said, I actually studied social work when I was younger for my first degree. It was, as I said, I basically understood. People were very understanding, very accommodating. There was a bunch of us from abroad, and it was fine. It was obviously a challenge, and I had to work at it. But the readings were in English, and my vocabulary was constantly improving as I would
Hmm.
sit in the class and make lists of words. And I mean, yeah, I guess it wasn't easy, but it was fine. It's an age where, you're okay to take on a challenge like that. You know what I mean? I sort of welcomed it.
So in college, that's what you did. You were studying social work in college, nothing
Mhm.
with writing at all.
No, 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 no.
So right after you got a job in social work right after college.
Yeah, yeah. I was working with well, I worked with two populations. One was the mentally ill and the other was the elderly. I actually worked with the elderly for a long time. I was helping to run an agency for caretakers, contact with the family, contact with the caretakers, contact with the actual elderly. And I did that for several years, but it wasn't completely satisfying for me.
So when did
It
you
was
first
I
start feeling that I know you said a little bit that you would you showed the interest in writing everything. So you're doing social work. When did you start thinking that, hey, I really want to start writing seriously? I really want to do that.
I think that when a person wants to write, there's a very big gap between envisioning being able to write something and having the time and the energy and the
Sure.
space and actually doing it. So again, like I had this idea in my head, like one day I'm gonna really try and write a novel. I thought that's and I thought I would be much, much, much older, maybe when I wasn't working anymore. That, some people think, okay, I'll go on pension and I'll paint. I'll go on pension, I'll learn to play the piano. Say I'll go on pension. I'm going to work on a novel, one day. But life was happening. I had a family. I had a job. And the idea of sitting and writing a novel was not foremost, in my life. And as I said, but the thing is that I always had ideas. I had ideas. Oh, I could write about this, or this would make an interesting story. What I have to, and sometimes I'd even write them down. I'd say one day I'll go back to this. I'll see what I can do with it. Just that. That's all it was for years and years and years. And as I said, then when I went to this class about Islam, I think there was something else. I think I'm very interested in history
Mhm.
and in archaeology. And living in Israel, there's just so many archaeological
Sure.
sites and places where things happened, and you can go and you're standing right there.
Can't go
It's
five
not
feet
even
in
like
Israel
you're
without
looking. What's that?
you can't go 5 feet in Israel without finding something that's
Yeah,
happened
yeah,
there, right?
like amazing places in the middle of the desert, or in the Golan, or in the Galil, or in
Hmm.
Jerusalem. And yeah, yeah, like everywhere you go, there's something like from the Crusader time, from the
Right.
Byzantines, from the Arabs, from the British who are here. The history is amazing, the Greeks and the Romans. And it would come alive for me in my head. And so when I was in this class and learning about, the development of Islam and how There was a time when it was it was a dominant religion, obviously. It spread very fast over a very, very wide area. And one of the reasons is because it was a very dynamic and vital culture at one time, and open to other ideas and to studying what the civilizations before had done and improving on that. And I just thought that's kind of amazing because we have Islam today, but it's gone in a different direction,
Mhm.
to say the least.
Well, yeah. Well, I'm going to come back to this topic in a second. I just want so once you've decided, okay, I'm going to write, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to do this. I'm curious, how long did it take you? Like what was your path to publication? How long from the concept to, hey, I have a finished book here that my book is being released right now.
Well,
How
what
long
I
did that
would
take?
do, I guess about 10 years. I would say it's about 10 years. Yeah. But like what I would do is every night I would write a scene. I would think about the scene during the day. I'm going to go home, I'm going to sit and I'm going to write this. And then I would do it. And every day I wasn't sure if I'd be able to do it, but then I could. And after a year and a half, I basically had the book. I had the first draft. It was done. And from there, that was just the beginning of the journey.
Did you
Little
take
did I
classes
know.
in between too? Did you take writing classes or get like
So after I had the first draft, I thought I should really go study writing, and I started to look into what's available. And happily, there was a program at Bar Ilan in English, creative writing in English, and
mhm,
it was perfect for me. It was exactly what I needed, and it really brought me into the world of writing and reading. And I was able to meet other people who were in the same situation, which is just so, so important when you're trying to write. Just to get an idea of, how your writing stands up to other writing, what other people are doing, how other people solve problems. So that was fantastic. But
yeah.
then after that, I still, it wasn't done. I had to look for a publisher, and that was very difficult.
How many years? So
Um,
that so after you started, it took another like 8 years or so looking for publishers for this stuff.
and I guess yeah. I mean, no, maybe not 8 years, but
It's not
easily
uncommon.
five
It's
or
not uncommon
six
at all.
years.
Yes, right.
I don't know, a long time.
It takes people don't realize that it takes so many years from when you first want to start doing it to studying your craft and making all these mistakes, how many revisions you're going to make, how many drafts you're going to do of your story.
Yeah, exactly. And then once you think it's all ready, to try and find someone to publish it is a whole other challenge. It's a whole other thing, and it doesn't matter that you have a great manuscript or
Right.
whatever. It doesn't matter. You still have this really gigantic hurdle ahead. Some people are lucky. They manage to find someone quickly,
How much
but
research did you have to put in for Wayward Moon?
a lot.
Yeah.
A lot. I mean, in this course, there were some texts that I was, exposed to, and the course was in Hebrew, which was great because Hebrew is closer to Arabic. So the Hebrew translations were, I think they were pretty good actually in terms of giving a sense of the tone and how people thought and how people behaved and, then the language they used.
Hmm.
But then the rest of the research was difficult because there isn't a lot about this period at
Right.
all. There wasn't a lot to rely on. So again, like living here, I was able to, see a lot of these geographical and cultural sites, for example, like an Arab school or a market or an inn where travelers could stay, which was a big feature of the region. And and that was extremely helpful just to be able to see it. And I started going to museums of Islam. There's one in Jerusalem, there's one in London, there's one in Paris. Whenever I could, I would pop in and look at the utensils they used and the paintings and the way people are depicted and the way life is portrayed. And that helped. And
Hmm.
and then the other thing I suppose was the culture here in Israel, which is in some ways very Middle Eastern in terms
Yeah.
of the values, that the family values, the way romantic love is perceived, the way notions of honor are perceived, the way women are perceived. I mean, and it was able to sort of give me a sense of what those societies might have been like that I was writing about.
Well,
And that's
your other book is also historical fiction, Our Little Histories. So can you tell me a little bit about that one?
yeah, here we are. This is a very different book, very different book. What happened was that after I finished, The Wayward Moon and talking about it and having it come out, I started to think about why I wrote it. And the reason is because obviously I am not from the Mizrahi culture. My family isn't from the region. I don't have a heritage in that culture.
Mhm.
And I started to think, okay, well, what about my culture? What about the person that I am and my own identity in terms of sort of looking at my own roots? And I realized that there was a problem. Um, this is how I would describe it. My family, like so many other Jews in North America, came over, say, about 100 years ago from what was the Pale of Settlement, and in my case, mostly Belarus. And although only say about 100 years past, say 4 generations, in my family, we know nothing virtually about the family who stayed behind, or even what life was like for let's say 5 generations back. And there's virtually, it's like a cut connection. It's severed. It's that's the word for it. It's severed in the middle, so that I know, all about my family, say, grandparents, parents, whatever. My grandparents, great grandparents I never met. They were the actual immigrants. And I know zero about why they came, how they came, what their life was like there. Um, you know, what Jewish life was like there, what the community was like there. And I thought that's a very strange thing. I think that in other ethnicities,
Mhm.
people kind of know, and sometimes you can trace hundreds and hundreds of years back and know exactly where your family was living and what they were doing. Not in our case, and not in the case of many. I mean, I think this was the story of the whole community. So it was a community that was kind of like from somewhere else, with values and a heritage from somewhere else, with zero connection. And of course, this was during the Cold War when I was growing up. So there was no way in the world you were going to know anything about life in what was the Pale of Settlement. It was almost like I don't want to say a magical place, but it was in the sense that it was inaccessible, entirely inaccessible. So I started to imagine, okay, well, what's the connection between us and those people who lived, say, 150 years ago, who are our direct ancestors? And, and how did it happen? This was another question I was sort of thinking about. How did it happen that, these Jewish communities who were like isolated and impoverished and vilified and, not part of the place they were living, and yet their ancestors, several generations later, were able to, become great successes
To
in the
flourish.
countries they moved to, whether it's America,
Mhm.
Canada, or Israel, and to just accomplish astonishing things within the space of, 70, 80 years. Like it's just a really interesting phenomenon. And I wanted to sort of think about that. So this was my way of thinking about it.
Well, you have two books, both historical. I love historical fiction. I have actually two books on submission now, one for kids, one for adult
No,
historical,
good luck.
fiction. Thank you. So I loved it. What is it about the genre that you touched upon it a little bit? What is it about historical fiction that appeals to you?
That's a really good question. I think that there's something about the past that, like, when we think about it today, we can think about terrible things that happen, but we're safe because they're not going to happen to
Mhm.
us. We're not part of it. We can imagine what it's like to be there, with all of that, whatever that entails. And it's very interesting and sometimes even enjoyable to be in that world, but it in no way threatens us. So I suppose there's that aspect. And I think also, just for me and maybe for you, if you also write in the genre, this idea that, like, it's so close and so far away. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? It's really far away from us. And on the other hand, those are people just like us. And if we had been in that place at that time, that would have been us on some level.
Curious, what is your favorite period in history?
Oh. Um, you mean as a reader or a writer or just
Well,
thinking
either
about
one.
it?
It's, yeah, it's just thinking about it. Is there one period
I
that fascinates you more than
do,
any other?
I don't think I have one, but I am really interested in periods where there's a lot of cultural activity and
Mhm.
innovation and change. I think those are really, really interesting periods to live through. Where there's possibilities that open up. Yeah, so
So there's no one that stands out more than any other.
um, this is really funny, but I think about ancient Greece sometimes.
Okay.
Like the
Fascinating
golden age
topic. Yeah,
of Greece.
fascinating era. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So, okay, so you had, and which you're no longer doing, what you told me, you had a Jewish book review site called Reading Jewish Fiction. Oh, but
Yeah.
when did you start that?
About 5 years ago. What happened was I realized that in the book world today, one of the most difficult things, once you've published, and hopefully you will experience this, once you've published, it's really challenging to find places that will, spread the word about your book, especially if you've written a book that you think, has something to offer people and you're interested in their reaction. Um, if you don't get out there and actively bring your book to people, nobody will know it.
Hmm.
So I also realized that, and this is the thing, I think it's difficult no matter who you are, no matter who publishes you. But generally speaking, if you're published by a big publisher, you have a better chance of getting publicity. Although I'm told that that's also not
Well,
always true.
it's
Don't
not always
rely
true.
on that. Exactly. So it's hard for everyone, but at the same time, obviously they're very focused on having people buy the books, getting them into bookstores, having them reviewed, having them, I don't know, getting influencers to talk about them, whatever. But the smaller publishers, they don't have the manpower, they don't have the budget,
Right.
and very often, very, very quickly, they come out and then they're sort of, they're not out there. Nobody's talking about them. So I thought it would be great to have a site where the idea is to write reviews, like sort of reviews that engage with the book, not just I really loved this or please read this or it changed my life, but really like engaging with what the
Right.
writer did. It would be great to have a site like that where, small presses could, turn to and then the idea was that only published writers would review the books because then you have somebody who's sort of writing about it from the inside, in terms of what it took to write and the effect it has. So that's what I did. I basically would, reach out to other published writers and say, would you like to review a book? Sometimes I told them what to review. Other times I said, whatever you like, just review something that you want to talk about. And it kind of worked. A lot of people were quite responsive to that. And
Well, you mentioned a couple of things. I mean, one about the resources. I was an agent for a while, and
mm,
I always told people that the publishing houses seem to put the most resources into the authors who need it least, because that's the one. If we have a Stephen King, we're going to put the most to promote that book, and you don't necessarily have to, but that is the way that it works a lot. So, how many books did you wind up reviewing on that site?
I think it came to 40 altogether. I mean, I did
Mm.
20 and then other people did the other 20. And you can still go in and see it. I mean, I guess it will be up for a few more months. And happily, another website, the
Mm.
Judith Journal. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's
Yes.
sort of
Well,
a new project.
when did you decide first to stop doing it?
Um, I guess I sort of felt like I had come to the end of my, for me, it was a project.
Right. Okay.
And I realized I have to either grow it, which I totally could have done, but it would involve a lot of work. I mean, I thought about maybe trying to monetize it in some way and then maybe pay the people who were reviewing.
Hmm.
But I realized that that's not the top of my priorities at the
Yeah, it
moment.
takes a lot of time. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well,
So,
I'm
yes. Yes.
sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No. Yes. All the endeavors. It's something has to give at some place. So, I'm writing. I'm doing the podcasting. So something other things have to give if I'm doing that. So
Exactly.
how did Judith Magazine become involved? You started talking about this. How did they become involved? They're taking over basically your site, and also they're going to be cataloging all the ones that you've already done, right?
Well, basically, they've taken all of the reviews and they're in their archive.
Okay.
So all the reviews can be accessed at Judith. I mean, the site isn't going to stay up indefinitely.
Right.
I am paying for the site and it's going to go down soon. But the reviews will still be out there and accessible. I basically was thinking, what can I do with it? And it's a shame to just let it all sort of evaporate. And then I turned to Elisa Wald, who is
Right.
running Judith, and she loved the idea of taking on at least the idea of an archive, and hopefully they're also going to be reviewing books over there. I mean, she has a bit of a different angle in terms of reviewing books, but I think at least in spirit, the idea will continue. That it's a place where writers can turn to have their work written about.
And you teach creative writing now?
I was for a while. I was teaching groups. I'm not doing it that much these days, just because I'm writing a PhD.
And that might
In
take a little
English.
bit of time, yes.
Exactly. I can't do it all.
Right.
So, but hopefully there'll be a day when I come back to it. I really enjoyed it. It was wonderful to work with people who are doing creative work and, see their stuff, think about it, help them try to improve it. Yeah,
And so you live in Israel now. Where around do you live?
in Rehovot.
So is there a big writing community there?
Um, no.
No?
No, but I can tell you that first of all, there is a wonderful English language writing community in Israel. There's a lot of English speakers who are doing writing of one kind or another.
Mhm.
And Bar Ilan is a fantastic sort of center. The program is a wonderful center. Every year they have, another year of graduates, people who have been through a process of really working on their writing and intense, working through whatever is difficult for them, getting feedback. And yeah, so there's a lot of people here who are involved in writing, and I try to be part of that community, whether it's going to book launches, being in touch with other writers, trying to support other writers.
Huh. So what you said your PhD, but creatively, what are you working on next?
Well, I have two manuscripts that I've already written that I'm hoping to publish. I'm not trying to publish them at the moment. One is something that I expect will be somewhat controversial because it's sort of honing in on an issue that's always been very disturbing to me. That's of gender segregation in Judaism in terms of
Mhm.
synagogue seating. It's a real pet peeve, and I think it's an issue that everybody just goes along with and accepts for the most part. And I sort of wanted to delve into why that is. So that's
I
one.
totally get it. Yeah, no, I don't disagree with you at all. I actually go to a Chabad, and I'm not Chabad, to a shul, and they're very welcoming, very fun. But it's different when you're not sitting with everyone. You're not sitting together with everyone. Sure.
Yeah. I mean, I think the idea of like a certain group of people who has to either sit at the back or sit behind a curtain and can't
Right.
lead is, don't get me started. But
Well,
anyway,
we'll see it in
I
your
sort of
book.
yeah, exactly. And I take it up in fictional form. It's not a treatise or a memoir or, or an
Mhm.
article. It's a story. It's absolutely a story, and that's the focus. And then another project that I just have a first draft. It's sort of modeled after, the book The Hours, Michael
I
Cunningham.
don't know that. No, I've
You
not read it.
don't?
No, no, I have
Oh
not read it.
my God. Like
So
go right now to, on
I'll have to go
Amazon
check it
and
out.
get the
Yes.
book. Oh, you have to. It's a wonderful book. They also made a wonderful movie, which I guess you didn't hear about either. It's about 20 years ago, but still, it's wonderful. I mean, the original is like you've got Virginia Woolf, and she's writing Mrs. Dalloway, and then you have a woman in 1949, and she's reading Mrs. Dalloway, and then you have Meryl Streep in the 1990s, and she's
Mm.
a modern version of Mrs. Dalloway, and you've got these three stories interacting together. So I did my version, which is, of course, completely different characters, but it's that same structure of like writer, reader, character
Mhm.
um, around the idea of creative work, sort of.
I look forward to seeing that from you. So how can people follow you on social media?
Well, I have a Facebook page, just Janice Weizman. I have an Instagram, whatever account. What else? Well, I have a website.
That would be
Yeah,
say the website name.
JaniceWeitzman.com.
Okay, sounds
That's it.
good. Everyone to go look for you there. Janice, thank you so much for coming on today. It was a pleasure getting to speak with you and getting to know
Thank you
you.
for hosting me, and good luck with writing and publication, and I'll look out for that.
Thank
Hopefully
you.
I'll say something.
So again, this has been The Jewish Lens. I'm Jonathan Rosen. And again, a very special thanks to Janice Weizman. And please like, comment, and subscribe.
Thanks for tuning in to The Jewish Lens, where all items used was strictly kosher.